I can do all things with God, grace and grace. Welcome to another inspiring episode of Podcast with SHEILA, the podcast that is spreading positivity around the world by sharing inspiring life experiences. Today's guest, Deb Curtis, is a beacon of resilience, a testament to the power of perseverance and determination. She is a remarkable woman who has overcome many obstacles in her life and career, and today we are going to discuss all of that and more. As usual, if someone was able to do it, you can do it too, and that is why we keep sharing these stories. Hello, Deb, and welcome to Podcast with SHEILA.
Oh, thank you, SHEILA. Very nice of you for the welcome.
We are glad to have you on this podcast and on this episode. Okay, I think in the last 2 months we've not done a recording because it's been like a roller coaster of events here. So I'm excited that we are bouncing back, and you're bouncing back with this strong story from you, and I'm excited for us to talk about it, like I said earlier on. So by way of introduction, who is Deb? Where does she come from? Just the basic stuff so that our audience get to know who our guest is today.
Fantastic. Deb was raised as a broken little girl, abandoned by her mother at age 9, and her father, after a 2-year court battle, won custody of me. And we lived a very frugal lifestyle. I was the youngest of 3. My 2 oldest sisters were already gone and doing their own thing in life. And thankfully, my father decided to move close to our high school, so I could walk to school, SHEILA, while he worked 2 jobs. He couldn't afford to put me through school, and he certainly wasn't going to co-sign on a student loan for me.
Yeah.
So my opportunities to go to school back in those days, which was the mid-'80s, was vanished. And back then, SHEILA, going to a university in America was a huge deal, and it still is today. But part of this story, my journey, will explain why it was a huge deal, because it was so important back then to have a university education on your resume, which in many cases, for many professions, yes, but not for all. So my senior year, I was already struggling in middle school with the abandonment of my mom, and just being a poor child, not having everything that everyone else had. They recognize it and they see it. I was the little girl who waited in back then, the separate hot lunch line to receive a different colored ticket for them to track that the district was paying to feed me, because we didn't have much money. So it was funny. Back then things were just more open, but then I think we still have issues with biases today and just opinions of people based on stuff like that. So my father, SHEILA, always taught me, even though I couldn't attend a university, just to work hard, and you can achieve anything. So that's what started me into my career. My first employer was of 18 years, and when I say employer, a professional employer, where I was able to get my foot in the door and as a customer service rep and work my way up over 18 years. So I'll stop there in case you might have a question about my past childhood at all. I wanted to find out, usually you'd hear that the common thing we hear is that the dads left the home, but in your case is the other way around. How did your mom not being a huge part, I don't know if she was a huge part of your life at some point in your life, but how did she, from the story you just said, how did she not being part of your life growing up did it affect your life in any way, being raised by your father, who is, a man? And that's a perfectly normal question, because back then the courts always gave the mom the custody. In the 70s, that was very common. My father, when we were little, when they were still married, moved us from a city, a metropolitan area, to a rural area, thinking that we would have a better lifestyle living in the country versus in the city. And all of that really wasn't true, because my mom was a stay-home mom taking care of us, and the ladies in the subdivision were all stay-home moms, and they started to get into pain meds, Valium and different kinds of pain meds and alcohol, because honestly they got bored, I guess, with all of us kids at school, and what are we going to do? So they hung out and started to get involved in the wrong stuff. So how did that impact me as a child? Well, SHEILA, it impacted me for over almost 40 years of my life. My mom was abandoned from my entire life. She was an adopted little girl. I understand it more today now that I'm older, but when I was younger, I didn't really see. She was given up because she was born with polio, and her biological parents just gave her up for adoption when she was a baby, so she never had a family. So I think she struggled with having a family because she never had one. And I wasn't planned. I just arrived accidentally, and at the time I arrived, her adopted father was dying of cancer. So there was a frustration with her having me to take care of because she was taking care of her sick foster dad. So I was the child that my father said was left in a bassinet for hours just crying because she would ignore me to take care of her father. So, that was part of her illness. So how did that affect me later on in life? I always prayed, SHEILA, for to have a normal family when I was a little girl. I didn't know who God was. I always knew there was a higher power. Because my mom would take us to Catholic church, and we would sit in the front pew. We had to sit in the front pew. If we missed church and didn't make it in time to get to that front pew, it was going to be a bad Sunday. She would be crabby, and that's the truth. So anyhow, fast forward to all these years, March of 2020, when the pandemic hit. She's 76 years old, hardly ever a part of my life, and I truly mean that. And I got a call from the home that she was staying at, which still was a drug home, but she was living there at 76 years old because she could afford it in a single efficiency, and the pandemic was really scaring her, and people were dying of drug overdose in the home she was living. So the pandemic brought us together, SHEILA. I had to move her in with my husband and my children, learn how to be with her after all these years, and she's still troubled with depression, highs and lows. She stayed with us for 6 months, and we found a beautiful senior living apartment across town from where we live, and I learned how to forgive, SHEILA.
My God. This is a very big story you just shared with us, especially the bit about forgiveness, because that is a point where most of us may struggle to get by, be able to go by that, be able to forgive somebody and move on. But for you to be able to do it, I wouldn't say you did it effortlessly, because for that long it may have taken a lot for you to get to this point, but you finally got there. And it's a very positive story you're putting out there in that line of forgiveness. And trust me, if you're listening to this episode, I want you to listen to the very end, because I think there's a message in there for everybody who would listen to this episode. So I'll urge anybody who listens to it to follow it up through to the end. But there was something that you mentioned that I grabbed as you were talking about, as you were sharing your story, and I hope I'll be able to get hold of it if it comes to me. But it's like it's gone. Hopefully it will come back. But the bit about stay-home moms. I work with a group like that. I work with moms. I work with women in general, and some of the women who come to me, some of them are stay-home moms. And being a stay-home mom is a job on its own, and it's quite difficult. But sometimes people outside of the world or outside of that group may not see it as difficult, because let's put being a stay-home mom, if your children are not babies, for you to have them all the time and they leave you and go to school, then you're left with nothing. If you're not doing anything, you're just left to yourself, and everyone know the things that are around the world. So what we do for women is we formed a group where all these women can come together and do what they love, like do craft or do something, and then like things like that. You could easily fall in the right company.
Wow. That's wonderful, but you're right. Stay-home moms, I guess you feel maybe dismissed because you're not working, and it is hard work.
It
is. Dad's expecting the dinner on the table at 5 and the house cleaned, and it's monotonous day in and day out, and maybe they just don't feel fulfilled, so they look for other avenues to make them feel better. In her case was alcohol and pain meds. So but that forgiveness piece, SHEILA, my whole entire life I didn't have forgiveness. In fact, much of my family was very bitter at her for what she did to me. I understand that, but now that I'm older and understand her past, I realize more for myself that I needed that forgiveness, and I needed to rekindle our relationship as we have today. And she always tells me she doesn't deserve what we do for her, but yet she's blessed. And I tell her, no, actually I'm blessed because I had the opportunity to rekindle my relationship with her before she moves on to home. And she's 80 years old, has lived with polio, has curvature of her spine, one lung because the spine collapsed her one lung from growing up. I don't know how she walks, but she does. She can be rather funny sometimes, but she's in constant pain. Pain. And I think a lot of people miss the fact that a lot of us are walking around in constant either physical pain or mental pain. And that's we got to remember that. And that's part of the journey for me to heal, was to forgive her. And the message I send to anyone listening is, if you have to forgive someone, you don't have to wait for the I'm sorry from them, because you might not get it. Because I never got a straight up I'm sorry from her, but that's okay, because her life was such a mess back then, and her life was a mess since the day she was given up for adoption. So in my heart, I have forgiven her, and she knows it because I love her. I hug her. We pick up groceries for her. She don't drive. We take her to the doctor. Yes, there's moments she's in pain and crabby, and I now kind of just have to laugh and chuckle and say, okay, you can't be like that with the doctors, or they're gonna give you a spanking. So forgive is the message.
Wow, that's a good one we're putting out there. Forgive. Well, let's move on to the year 1990s, where you were told by your bosses that they didn't promote women. Can you tell us what profession that was back then and how all of that started?
So you heard me mention that I didn't go to college, so I did not have that college education on my resume. My first career job was 18 years as a professional job. Prior to that, I was a waitress, a server. Anybody can do that. And there's good money in that too, believe it or not, if you hustle. But I moved into a finance company position. I was in customer service. And this company, we helped individuals that had poor personal credit history, and their scores were lower, and they needed a car loan, and they would obtain a car loan from the company I worked for, but the interest rates were high because it was more risk. But with that, SHEILA, people usually, if they've paid late payments in the past, they may do it again. The odds are they may do it again, and many of them did. So part of the process was we had to collect payments, and make sure people paid on time, knock on the doors in the neighborhoods looking for their money. And if they didn't pay and fell so many months past due, we had to repossess the car. Now, back then, the women weren't branch managers, and it was the branch manager's responsibility, which was all men, to do the repossessions. But the men always brought the assistant managers. I was able to get promoted to an assistant. So I always went on those repossession calls. We didn't hire repo companies. We would find a car and hire a tow truck company. No cell phones. We had to go to the local payphone and call our tow truck guy to meet us on a corner to go hook up the car. I did that with the men. So time had surpassed, and I was a top performer, and I wanted to be promoted because I felt I deserved it. I was doing better than my comparator male peers. And the male management at that time declined me wanting to be promoted for two reasons. Number one, and they were very public and vocal about it, I was a woman, and they said they don't promote women to branch managers. And number two was because I didn't have that college education. So I was positively persistent, SHEILA, that would be the best way to put it. I kept telling them, I really want this position. I know I can do it. I'm already doing it. So after some time, they agreed to put me on what they call a probationary period of that promotion over 6 months. And I surpassed my male peers at all the different locations. I pulled in better numbers than they did. So they agreed to promote me, but without the same pay. And they said, because, again, I can't get the same pay because I'm a woman and I don't have the college education. So I still took that promotion, SHEILA, because it was more important to me to have that at the top of my resume, that I was promoted in the same company. To me, that was my college education, hard work and fire in the belly.
So how did it feel when you heard that, one, you were a woman, especially that, and even when they said because you didn't have the college degree, because sometimes you don't need a degree to perform, because in so many stories we've heard down the line, there are people who are making it who never had a college degree, and there are so many examples to that, because some people learn very fast. They don't have to sit in the classroom to be taught. They are self-taught and they learn as they go on. So they may have all the experience. They may even know better than the people who are sat in class and been taught. So that shouldn't be a hindrance to you being promoted if it's obvious that you're doing the work and you're even doing it better than, So how did you feel, one, when you were told you're a woman and you can't be promoted, and when you were also told that you didn't have the college degree, yet they knew that you were performing above the level they had put you?
I was frustrated. But I knew my frustration and being mad at them wasn't going to win me a promotion or earn me a promotion. I had to just keep working hard. I still recall hearing my dad, you just have to show them that you can do it and work hard. I kept that frustration to myself and worked hard and still earned more accolades and still was in the top 1 to 3 branches. But eventually, SHEILA, I left because I still was treated differently than the men. I have to say, I did open up the gates for other women to get promoted in that company, which that was, for me, a success, and I felt like I did my work. And now it was time for me to take that promotion and look for more career positions, so to speak, to climb the ladder, which is difficult in many industries that are dominated by men. And in America, for sure, dominated by white men. It just is what it is. It's always been that way. So I left that company and started working for banks, and that's when I started getting into business banking, SBA lending, and supporting small businesses, which is very dominated by the male counterpart of me. Same stories. Every stop, every employer that I was at, now they couldn't say because you are a woman, because the laws that were in place, fair and equal treatment, inclusivity, diversity. And we all know employers talk a talk and they have it written in their policies, but along my journey, they don't walk it. Exactly. Internally or externally. And what I mean by that is, if they don't walk it internally, many of the front sales people that are talking to small business owners or people that want to acquire a business, they don't practice diversity and inclusivity in the employer. Some of the front line are not going to practice it when people are applying for a loan. They have their biases because nobody's getting on them for their biases internally. So why would they track them externally? And a lot of these frontline lenders that work for banks have their own assumptions and biases regarding a certain color applicant or a certain gender. I witnessed that. And my journey continued where I was pushed back from any kind of promotion, or if I needed a rush or a special interest rate on a business loan, it never was granted to me because I was the only girl on the all-male team. They would give it to the top performing men. So it was always a struggle for me. My hurts of my corporate past and my challenges, they were awful. Many times I would leave work just crying my eyes out from being treated differently than the men. Those hurts over the years have created my solutions for today for others who are going through the same. And that's what I call my small business. So I'm happy to help women and all people of color that need a loan to purchase, finance, establish businesses because of the huge baby boomer retirement that's happening.
I like where the story has diverted to with regards to discrimination against gender and race. I think a couple of weeks back, or about a month ago, I taken my son to the hospital, and as I sat there, I saw a pattern, and I realized the relationship that was going on between race nurses. And a particular race of a nurse was in senior management and another race was in junior management, and I saw the way the senior manager spoke to the junior manager, and I saw something different that wasn't like my boss talking to me, but it looked like something else I was looking at. And I've heard too many times some of these things go on and on and on, like I said, because I work with women, and most of these women had worked in professional levels before they had retired or left, and they communicate when they come here and they talk about it. And I wonder why people still stay in these places, these organizations, when they are being discriminated against with regards to skin color, the way you speak, kind of things like that, why people keep on going. But you realize that if it's their source of income, they don't have an option. But what I always say is, do to others what you want them to do to you. Because at some point, life is very funny. At some point in time, you think you are at your best position, but things could easily change, and the person you're being nasty to could become the person you'll be looking for some help or for some service from. And so many times people come here and they say, oh, I wasn't expecting this organization to be managed by a black person. They don't say it straight up when they come, but after they've settled, they've gotten into the groove, and they see that they can talk, then I was surprised when I first saw you, and I wasn't expecting to see a black person. They say things like that, but I hear things like this, so they don't bother me. But some people say, why they should bother you? But they don't bother me because it's the way things have been put out there, and you call them systems, things, the way things have been done and have been accepted, which is not right. But I always say when I meet anybody, that if you don't want it to be done to you, don't do it to somebody else. Because you should know that it's not nice. So don't do it to somebody else. But I think you're a very brave woman for you to be working in a male-dominated company, yet you're able to use your voice to speak out and make yourself be heard. And I believe they did hear it. Else, other women wouldn't be having that position, even though it didn't happen in your time. But you were able to make the way for other people to come through. And I also want to believe that probably that was your calling whilst you were there. I would want to believe that was your calling, because definitely.
Oh, see the twinkle in my eyes when you said that?
Yeah.
Yes. I found that out through talking to God a while back. I had a coach regarding my business that said to me, because we were talking about who I want to serve, and I want to serve women and people of color because of the experiences that I went through. And her words to me were, why would you discount the white corporate man if that's your number one applicant, if that's the one that applies and gets these loans all the time and has the money and the experience? And I said to her, because it's not the fire in my belly. They're the ones that made it difficult for me. So why would I run a business helping raise them up to greater places? Now, I'll help them if they believe in unity and diversity. But based on my experience, God called me to help those that don't even know how to go about this process. And a lot of that is just simply because they weren't granted the opportunities in corporate to learn what other options are out there. If I knew what I know today, how to purchase, finance, and establish, I probably wouldn't be here talking to you today. If I would have known this 10 years ago, I would have acquired a couple of businesses and they'd be running on their own, and I'd be enjoying time with my grandchildren. So I changed that today, SHEILA, and I help others rise above. Wow. That's my message. The twinkle in my eyes when you said, I bet you found your calling. Oh, yes, I did. Yeah.
And sometimes you have to go through rough parts to actually find the purpose for which you are here on earth. And sometimes when I sit back and I look back like 10 years back, maybe a bit more, 13 years back, I was miserable. And some of the parts I had gone through, today I appreciate those parts, because I see that God was just preparing me. Preparation stage is always very difficult, very unpleasant. It's a place where you don't want to be, but when you're going through, you wouldn't know you're being prepared for something greater. You never know, because it doesn't show. It never shows. Your preparation, nothing shows, nothing good shows. And it looks like you're worth nothing at that stage, because you're trying so many things and God is still putting you through so many phases. And I still go through phases now, but when I go through them, I know that it's for a greater end, because I've been there before, I've seen it. And every stage I go through, I just go through, I wouldn't say with delight, but at least with some hope, knowing that definitely there's something big at the end, because else I wouldn't be going through that. And that is my hope for going through. And every time I go through a stage, something bigger happens, something bigger keeps happening. So when I talk to people like you, I'm always empowered. And I believe anybody who will be listening to us should be empowered as well, because if you've done it, if I've done it, and if they are going through their preparation stage, they should have some hope and courage and know that if others have done it, they can do it as well.
Wow, that's huge. And I think of the times, I'll add to this, driving home from different employers, crying my eyes out in the car because of being treated differently as a woman. And I might add, there's an issue in corporate where I call it the culture of silence, where the workplace, a lot of women and other men witness what is happening, the disparate treatment and the discrimination. Some of it is horrific. I've had some of the worst male bosses that were horrific and scared us, and he treated certain women harder than others. You can't go to HR because they protect the company.
Yeah.
And then if they send out surveys to everybody or interview everyone, no one says anything because they have a fear that that'll put a target on their back. I was the one that always said something because I'm honest, and if I, like you mentioned earlier, if you see something that's not right, you should say something.
Yeah.
But for the norm, SHEILA, they don't, because they don't want to lose their job. So those moments driving home, tears down my eyes, I would just cry out to God, like, why me? Because even my husband said, your journey has been so difficult. You're right, SHEILA. He was preparing me for the now.
Yeah.
And anyone out there that's going through those hardships, he is preparing you for something bigger.
Yeah.
And if I could have told myself that back then, I might have thought, okay, and I would have rested more in him, but I was lost.
Wow.
So I hope your listeners get something out of this, because it might not be easy, but that just means he's preparing you for something greater.
Exactly. Tune in same time next week for the part 2 of this episode. Have a brilliant day. Until we meet again. Bye.